Imagine Europe in 1914. It wasn't a peaceful place. It was more like a giant powder keg, filled with tension, just waiting for a single spark to set it all off. For decades, great empires had been competing for power, land, and influence. This intense rivalry was fueled by a few dangerous ideas. Nationalism, a fierce pride in one's country that often turned into aggression towards others. Imperialism, the race to build vast overseas empires which created friction between nations. Militarism, the belief that a strong army was the ultimate sign of a great nation, leading to a massive arms race where countries built bigger and bigger armies and navies. This created a continent on edge where any small conflict could quickly spiral out of control. The spark finally came on a sunny day, June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was visiting the city with his wife Sophie. As their car drove through the streets, a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip stepped out from the crowd and fired a pistol. The Archduke and his wife were killed. This single act of political assassination was the trigger that the world had been dreading. Europe in 1914 was divided into two armed camps, bound by a complex web of treaties. These alliances were meant to provide security. If one country was attacked, its allies were sworn to come to its defense. The first major bloc was the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy. They promised to support each other in case of an attack. This alliance was primarily a defensive pact, but it created a powerful central bloc in the heart of Europe. On the other side was the Triple Entente: France, Russia, Great Britain. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, the dominoes began to fall with terrifying speed. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of the Slavic peoples, including the Serbs, began to mobilize its massive army to support Serbia. According to its military strategy, known as the Schlieffen Plan, Germany couldn't fight a war on two fronts at the same time. To get to France quickly, Germany needed to march through neutral Belgium. So, Germany declared war on France on August 3rd and invaded Belgium the next day. The invasion of neutral Belgium was the final straw for Great Britain. Britain had signed a treaty guaranteeing Belgium's neutrality and could not stand by while Germany violated it. On August 4, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. In just over a week, a regional dispute had exploded into a continental war. The alliance system designed to prevent war had instead made it inevitable. The major powers of Europe were locked in a fight to the death. When the war began, everyone believed it would be over by Christmas. Young men enthusiastically signed up, expecting a short, glorious adventure. Germany's Schlieffen Plan was designed for exactly that, a swift, decisive victory. The German army stormed through Belgium and into northern France, pushing the French and British forces back toward Paris. But at the Battle of the Marne in early September 1914, the Allied forces managed to halt the German advance just miles from the capital. This crucial battle shattered the dream of a quick war and marked the beginning of a brutal stalemate. Unable to outflank each other, the opposing armies began to dig in. What started as simple ditches soon evolved into a vast and complex network of trenches that stretched for nearly 475 miles, from the North Sea coast all the way to the Swiss border. This unbroken line of fortifications became known as the Western Front. For the next 4 years, this landscape would barely move, despite countless bloody battles. Millions of soldiers lived and died in this hellish world of mud-barbed wire and constant fear. Life in the trenches was a miserable existence, defined by boredom, terror, and appalling conditions. The defining feature of trench warfare was the terrifying over-the-top assault. On the signal of a whistle, soldiers would climb out of their trenches and advance across the shell-pocked wasteland known as No Man's Land. They walked directly into a hail of machine gun fire, artillery shells, and barbed wire. Battles like the Somme and Verdun became infamous for their staggering casualties, where hundreds of thousands of men were lost for the gain of just a few miles of mud-soaked ground. While the Western Front is the most iconic image of World War I, the conflict was fought on many other fronts across Europe and the Middle East. The Eastern Front was a vast and fluid battlefield, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Here, the armies of Germany and Austria-Hungary clashed with the colossal forces of the Russian Empire. Unlike the static trench warfare of the West, the fighting on the Eastern Front was more mobile. The sheer size of the territory made defensive lines harder to establish and maintain. Huge armies swept back and forth across Poland, Galicia, Russia, resulting in enormous battles and massive casualties. The Russian army, though immense in numbers, was poorly equipped and badly led. Its soldiers fought bravely, but they suffered from shortages of rifles, ammunition, boots. However, the immense strain of the war took its toll on Russia. By 1917, the country was collapsing from within. Food shortages, military disasters, political unrest led to the Russian Revolution. The Tsar was overthrown, and the new Bolshevik government, led by Vladimir Lenin, signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918, pulling Russia out of the war. Another significant front opened in the south when Italy, after initially staying neutral, joined the Allied side in 1915, hoping to gain territory from Austria-Hungary. The Italian front was fought in the treacherous mountain terrain of the Alps. This was a brutal war of attrition fought at high altitudes, where soldiers had to contend with avalanches and freezing temperatures in addition to the enemy. The Ottoman Empire, based in modern-day Turkey, joined the Central Powers in late 1914, opening up several new fronts in the Middle East. The Allies, particularly Britain, saw the Ottomans as a weak link, and launched the disastrous Gallipoli campaign in 1915. The plan was to seize the Dardanelles Strait, capture the Ottoman capital of Constantinople, and open a supply route to Russia. The campaign was a catastrophic failure, resulting in heavy Allied casualties and a humiliating withdrawal. However, fighting continued in the Middle East, with British forces including troops from Australia, New Zealand, India, battling the Ottomans in Mesopotamia and Palestine, a conflict made famous by figures like T.E. Lawrence or Lawrence of Arabia. The Great War was not just a European conflict, it was the first truly global war in history. The vast colonial empires of the European powers meant that when they went to war, their empires went to war with them. Countries like Britain and France mobilized millions of soldiers and laborers from their colonies in Africa, Asia, the Pacific. Over 1 million Indian soldiers fought for the British Empire on various fronts, from the trenches of France to the deserts of Mesopotamia. France recruited nearly 500,000 soldiers from its African colonies. These men were often thrown into the fiercest fighting and suffered disproportionately high casualty rates. In addition to soldiers, hundreds of thousands of laborers were recruited from places like China, Vietnam, South Africa, to work behind the lines, digging trenches, building railways, loading supplies. Their labor was essential to keeping the war machines running. The war also extended to the colonies themselves, with fighting breaking out in Africa as British and French forces moved to capture Germany's colonial possessions. The war was also fought on the high seas. From the very beginning, Great Britain used its powerful Royal Navy to impose a naval blockade on Germany. The goal was to cut off Germany's access to vital raw materials, food, supplies, slowly strangling its economy and war effort. Germany in response turned to a new and terrifying naval weapon: the U-boat or submarine. German U-boats began to wage a campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking merchant ships heading for Britain without warning. The sinking of the British passenger liner RMS Lusitania in 1915, which killed over 1,100 people, including 128 Americans, caused outrage in the United States and turned public opinion sharply against Germany. While it didn't immediately bring America into the war, it was a critical step. The naval war demonstrated that no corner of the globe was safe from the conflict. By 1917, the war had been raging for 3 exhausting years, and both sides were desperate for a breakthrough. The first was Germany's fateful decision to resume unrestricted submarine warfare in February 1917. The German High Command gambled that they could starve Britain out of the war before the United States, angered by the sinking of its ships, could effectively intervene. It was a massive miscalculation. The second event was the entry of the United States into the war. Public opinion in America had long been divided with a strong isolationist sentiment. However, Germany's submarine warfare, the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, a secret message in which Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico against the United States, proved to be the final push. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. While it would take time to raise, train, and transport an army to Europe, the entry of the United States was a devastating blow to the Central Powers. While America's entry provided a long-term advantage, new technology was also changing the face of the battlefield. The British introduced the tank at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. These early tanks were slow, clumsy, and mechanically unreliable, but they offered a glimpse of a potential solution to trench warfare. As landships that could cross no man's land, crush barbed wire, protect soldiers from machine gun fire, they held the promise of restoring mobility to the battlefield. The air war also evolved dramatically: simple reconnaissance planes, deadly fighter aircraft, strategic bombers. In the spring of 1918, Germany launched its Spring Offensive, a series of powerful attacks designed to break the Allied lines and win the war before the American forces could arrive in large numbers. The offensive was initially successful, pushing the Allies back dozens of miles. But the German army was exhausted, its soldiers were underfed, and they lacked the reserves to sustain their attack. The Allies, now reinforced by fresh American troops, bent but did not break. After weathering Germany's massive spring offensive, the Allies were ready to strike back. Under the unified command of French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, and bolstered by hundreds of thousands of fresh American soldiers and a growing number of tanks, the Allies launched a series of coordinated counteroffensives in the summer and fall of 1918. This final phase of the war is known as the 100 Days Offensive. It began with the Battle of Amiens on August 8, 1918, a day that the German General Ludendorff called the Black Day of the German Army. Using surprise, tanks, and aircraft in a combined arms assault, the Allies shattered the German lines. Unlike previous battles that had resulted in tiny gains at a huge cost, the 100 Days Offensive saw the Allies consistently pushing the German army back. The stalemate was finally broken. The German army, which had been on the brink of victory just months earlier, was now in full retreat. Its soldiers were demoralized, exhausted, and suffering from severe supply shortages due to the Allied blockade. At home, the German people were starving, and political unrest was growing. Germany's allies were also collapsing. Bulgaria surrendered in September, followed by the Ottoman Empire in October. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, torn apart by internal nationalist movements, disintegrated and signed an armistice in early November. Faced with certain military defeat and revolution at home, the German High Command knew the war was lost. The German Kaiser, Wilhelm II, was forced to abdicate and fled to the Netherlands. A new German government was formed, and it immediately sought an end to the fighting. Negotiations began with the Allies, who demanded a complete surrender. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the guns on the Western Front finally fell silent. An armistice was signed in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, France, bringing an end to over 4 years of unimaginable bloodshed. The Great War was over. The news was met with a mixture of jubilation and profound sorrow. Celebrations broke out in the streets of London, Paris, and New York. The end of World War I did not bring the lasting peace that so many had hoped for. In 1919, the victorious Allied leaders met in Paris to hammer out the peace terms. The resulting Treaty of Versailles placed the full blame for the war on Germany and its allies, imposing crippling financial reparations, severe military restrictions, significant territorial losses. This so-called war guilt clause created deep and lasting resentment in Germany, which would be exploited by extremist political movements, including Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Instead of healing the wounds of war, the harsh terms of the treaty sowed the seeds for an even more destructive conflict just 2 decades later. The war redrew the map of the world. 4 great empires, the German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman, crumbled into dust. In their place, a host of new countries were born, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. However, these new borders were often drawn without regard for the ethnic populations on the ground, creating new minorities and new sources of tension. In the Middle East, Britain and France carved up the former Ottoman territories, creating mandates that would eventually become the modern states of Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, setting the stage for decades of future conflict in the region. The social and technological impact of the war was immense. The conflict accelerated technological development in fields like aviation, communications, and medicine. It also brought about profound social changes. With millions of men away at the front, women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking on jobs in factories and offices that had previously been reserved for men. This contribution was a major factor in the push for women's suffrage, and many countries granted women the right to vote in the years following the war. However, the war also left a deep psychological scar on the survivors, a sense of disillusionment and loss known as the lost generation. Today, more than a century after the first shots were fired, World War I remains critically important. It was a watershed moment in history that shaped the modern world. It ushered in an age of ideological conflict, destroyed old monarchies, and gave rise to new political movements like communism and fascism. The war's unresolved issues and the flawed peace that followed led directly to World War II. Understanding the causes of the Great War, the dangers of extreme nationalism, secret alliances, and unchecked militarism, serves as a powerful and enduring lesson for our own time. It reminds us of the fragility of peace and the catastrophic human cost of global conflict.